My name is Jay Seaton, and I'm excited to moderate the Colorado State Treasurer debate. We'd like to welcome Democratic candidate Dave Young and Republican candidate Lang Sias to the stage. Thank you both for joining us this afternoon and your willingness to serve as Treasurer of Colorado. Before we begin, we'd like to go over some of the ground rules. Candidates should focus on ideas, not personalities. Candidates should be courteous and should not make inflammatory statements. Disrespectful or attacking speech or profane language will not be tolerated. Candidates may not display a prop of any kind. Candidates must strictly adhere to the time limits of each section of the debate. The moderator reserves the right to cut off a candidate who exceeds the time limit or to redirect a candidate if their remarks are not pertinent to the elected office. Do you both agree to these rules?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Additionally, we ask that all audience members exhibit professional decorum during these debates. Limited applause is allowed, but unruly outbursts or disruptions are prohibited, and the debate moderator may penalize a candidate's time if their supporters are unable to maintain decorum. Audience members should also be aware that these debates will be filmed and live streamed for public viewing. With that, we will begin with opening remarks. A coin toss was conducted backstage, and candidate Young has chosen to begin opening remarks. Mr. Young, you have 3 minutes for opening remarks.
Very good. And Jay, thank you so much for taking time out of your day. I know you're very busy to do this work, and thank you for being here. I want to thank Christian and Club 20. As a member, I appreciate the work that Club 20 does, and it's my pleasure to be here today. I am Dave Young. I'm your Colorado State Treasurer. I have been since January of 2019. It's an honor and a privilege to serve in that capacity. Just a little bit about me. In most of my career, I was a teacher. I taught for almost 25 years in a junior high in Greeley, taught math, science, and technology, and also spent some time in higher ed teaching in a master's program for about a decade. Also worked in the tech sector for about 4 years, 2 different stints there. So 4 years ago on a stage here in Grand Junction, I talked about what the Treasury does and what the Treasurer does. And the number one job that the Treasurer needs to do is to protect the taxpayers' dollars. And over the past 4 years, that's exactly what I've done. I've worked very hard to ensure, through rocky economic times, that the taxpayer dollars were held safe, and that we beat our benchmarks on investments, and that we returned large amounts of unclaimed property and managed the state's debt profile as well. So very proud of that work over the last almost 4 years. And I can delve further into that as we go along through the session here. I will also say that because of the economic situation, I worked with many others in order to respond both to near-term and long-term situations that we face here in the state. One of those, coming out of the economic downturn that resulted from the pandemic, is the fact that we have a lot of small businesses here in the state of Colorado that, at least at the start of the pandemic and the economic downturn, needed support. And so I worked very closely with a lot of business leaders, and we eventually went to the legislature and got approval of a program called Climber. It's a $250 million small business loan program. Market forces, specifically due to the Paycheck Protection Program, changed the profile of that program. We came back this last session, made some adjustments, and that program's up and running, and as economic conditions continue to change, is ready for businesses across the state. And the other thing we're about to pilot next month and launch in January of 2023 is a retirement savings program for 1 million people in the state of Colorado who work in the private sector and don't have access to retirement savings at work. And this is about 40% of our private sector workforce. So I'm very proud that we've been able to put together a comprehensive program. Both Climber and the Colorado Secure Savings Program, this retirement program, are public-private partnerships, and I can delve more into those as we go along as well.
Thank you, Mr. Young. Now, candidate Sias, you have 3 minutes for opening remarks.
May I? Well, thank you very much, Jay, and thank you all very much for being here. It is great to be back out again in Mesa County and see so many friends and colleagues. My name is Lang Sias, and I'm the Republican candidate for state treasurer. A little bit of background: I have lived in Jefferson County for 22 years with my wife and 3 children. The oldest just started at the Colorado School of Mines. The 2 youngest are in Jeffco Public Schools, 7th and 9th grade. We're in the thick of it. We have some skin in the game here. My background: I grew up in a small business, literally with one in the basement, and watched my family work to try and build something. I also was able to work as an adult with many entrepreneurs here in Colorado, helping them build businesses and create something. And I mention that because that perspective in supporting small businesses, I have a gut level respect for the people that do it. I spent 27 years in the military as a fighter pilot in the Navy and in the Air National Guard, made a number of trips overseas, have deep respect for the folks I worked with, was a Top Gun instructor for about 3.5 years. All I will say about the movie is the real thing has a lot less suntan oil than the movie does. I was privileged to serve in the state legislature representing Jefferson County for 4 years, where I believe I built a solid reputation as somebody who was fiscally responsible and at the same time was able to reach across the aisle and get things done. We had good progress. We got first in the nation pro-school choice legislation passed, healthcare transparency, and most importantly to this position, we got reforms of our public pension system, PARA, in a bipartisan way that put PARA back on its feet. I am running for this office because I want to restore some balance to Colorado's statewide leadership on economic issues. We have seen, frankly, what happens with single-party rule, and it has created a affordability crisis and a cost of living crisis here in Colorado. I will use the treasurer's office to weigh in and work to lower costs for families and small businesses. As your treasurer, I will run the treasurer's office and the program that it oversees efficiently and lead by example in that fashion and not engage in any empire building at the taxpayer's expense. I will be a strong, independent voice of leadership for PARA. I am the only candidate who actually has a record of leading on PARA reform. I will defend our taxpayer Bill of Rights. I will work very hard to ensure that we do cost-benefit analysis of our legislation and our rules. And finally, I will work to ensure that we evaluate the actual impacts of our spending. What do we accomplish with the money that we spend? We should not be judging ourselves on what we spend, but what we accomplish for the voters and for the taxpayers. It would be my great honor to serve you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Sias. We'll now move into the question and answer portion of the debate. Each candidate will be asked to respond to 4 questions that have been submitted by Club 20 members and our partners. Each candidate will have 1.5 minutes to respond to each question. The candidate who goes first on each question will also have an opportunity to offer a 60-second rebuttal to the other candidate's response for that question. The candidate that went first in opening remarks will offer the first response to the first question. So, candidate Young, you get the first question, and you get the first response to the first question. And that is, what is the role of the Colorado State Treasurer in supporting business development in Western Colorado?
Thank you, Jay, and thanks for the question. As I mentioned earlier, I see the role of the treasurer as having a larger ability to actually impact economic conditions across the state. I mentioned the Climber Small Business Loan Program that we launched. And this program is not restricted only to the Western Slope, but it's certainly every county in the state, and businesses that have 100 or fewer employees are going to be able to access these loans through the Climber program. And so certainly we are looking at hard data now that the Paycheck Protection Program has worked its way through. We see small businesses that are actually beginning to access lines of credit, maybe actually maxing out credit cards, maybe even the owners dipping into savings or retirement savings. This is tough times for a lot of businesses, and we have sales tax receipts across the state that show us where those distressed areas are, and we're doing extra outreach to make sure that those businesses are actually aware of the program. If it's the right program for them, then we will work with them to help them secure a loan. I will also say that the retirement savings program is also something, the Colorado Secure Savings Program is something that will affect everybody across the state. My idea is that we want to lift people up. We want to make sure that they're sustainable, whether it be in their business enterprise or in retirement, and make sure that people have a financial pathway to security.
Thank you, Mr. Young. Same question, Mr. Sias.
Well, thank you very much. And as the treasurer, I will be charged with running the same two programs that Treasurer Young referred to, and I will do those with enthusiasm, and I will do it with a real attention to detail. I will also be very candid with not only the legislature, but the voters on the success of those programs. We can talk more about these in detail, but it is fair to say that the program that has already been stood up has fallen far short of expectations, and there are reasons to be somewhat skeptical about the future of the other program. I think that the treasurer also plays a role in being able to weigh in on economic issues, use the bully pulpit of that office. We have seen in this state many taxes and fees and regulations imposed over the last 3 years, in particular with single-party rule, that have frankly just driven up costs for businesses, particularly small businesses, and families, and it has hit the western slope particularly hard. Some of those, for example, are the new set of transportation taxes and fees. We have 11 new fees, 4 new enterprises. We have taxes on health plans. We have taxes on insurance company premiums. We have new regulations in the healthcare space that are going to drive up costs for certain folks, and of course what has been done to our energy industry to make it less competitive. So I will weigh in as an advocate on those issues as well.
Rebuttal?
And actually, I'm currently weighing in on tax policy. I'm a member of the Tax Policy Task Force. We just met a couple of days ago. We continue to look at comprehensive changes to the tax policy. I will say in regard to the two programs, both Climber and the Colorado Secure Savings Program, I actually chair a board, and those boards are appointed by other officials here in the state of Colorado based on their expertise. And so the two programs were actually run through the legislature. We had bipartisan, actually in the state Senate, unanimous support when we ran the bill the first time in 2020. And we worked very hard to follow the law, make sure that what the legislature intended is actually happening. We came back on Climber, made some changes, again ran that through the legislature, used the expertise of lots of teams in my job. Those two boards are not the only two. I'm a proud member of the PARA board as a PARA member since 1975. I work very closely in teams to make sure that our retirees are sustainable.
Thank you, Mr. Young. Mr. Sias, you get first crack at the second question. What is your perspective on issuing certificates of participation to lease state buildings to be used as collateral to issue new debt?
Generally speaking, I am opposed to that because it is a way around our taxpayer Bill of Rights. I believe that when the state borrows money and also when it raises taxes, and if it intends to spend our Tabor tax refunds, we should be asking for the people's permission to do so. And there are limited circumstances where I would support certificates of participation. I understand it, but I think generally speaking, it has been used as a mechanism to avoid seeking the approval of the people for when we raise money and when we spend money.
And same question, unless you'd like to have the question repeated.
Please, would you? I would appreciate that.
The question is, what is your perspective on issuing certificates of participation to lease state buildings to be used as collateral to issue new debt?
Well, thanks for the question. It's a very detailed question. I'm not going to have enough time to go into it. I will tell you that in 2012, debt management was consolidated into the Treasury, and it is a very expansive part of the work that we do. Certificates of participation take a large amount of time. They're more expensive than bonding, but because Tabor doesn't allow us to do bonding without a vote of the people, this is an alternative that allows us to move forward. And you can just imagine what would happen to our supply chain and other modes of business operation if every time we needed to make some kind of improvement in transportation, we had to wait and run through an entire election cycle and go to the people and ask for permission. The legislature is actually charged with providing the funding for the debt service on COPs, and so this still has indirect approval from voters, because who you elect as your representatives actually decides what COPs are going to be done and what aren't. My job is to follow the law. We do that, as I say, this business of COPs, almost every dollar that we are issuing under COPs has to be collateralized. This is what we're talking about with state buildings, and frankly, we're running out of collateral. So a lot of our work really is appraising and deciding, whether the title is clear, whether there's environmental issues. I knew I was going to run out of time because this is a very complicated part of the work that I do, but I've really enjoyed doing the work.
Thank you, Mr. Young. Rebuttal?
Well, thank you very much. I mean, you heard him say we've almost run out of collateral. The whole point of Tabor and what makes it so special and what makes Colorado so special in this regard is the interaction and the discussion that has to occur and that should occur between our elected representatives and the people. And this, as I think we quite clearly see from Representative Young, is a way to get out of having that conversation. I agree, there are limited number of times when this may be appropriate, but we shouldn't be running out of collateral. It's just an end run around the dialogue with you, with the people. And that, I believe, is important. It makes Colorado special, and I will always stand up for it.
Thank you, Mr. Size. Third question goes to Mr. Young. Generally, what is your view on PARA? The treasurer is a member of the governing board of PARA. Will you attend all of the meetings? What will be your approach to PARA's unfunded liability?
Thanks for the question. As I mentioned, I've been a PARA member since 1975, so I have skin in the game, coming up on 50 years as a member, and I think it's very important that we ensure that PARA is sustainable for generations out into the future. So I'm one of 16 members on that board of trustees. I serve on the investment committee, so I have dual roles there. I have another committee that I serve on as well. I have attended every meeting, except I think I had to leave one early, and my deputy treasurer stepped in for me. But it's of great interest to me, and it's a very important duty, and I take it very seriously. What may not be known well in the state of Colorado is the fact that PARA was sitting at about 105% funded in the year 2000. In other words, the unfunded liability did not exist in the year 2000, but some poor decision-making was made coming out of the governor's office and the General Assembly and the treasurer's office in that year that actually caused the steep expenditure of money. If you have less money coming in than you have going out, you're going to end up with a fund that becomes unfunded, and that's the real source of the unfunded liability. Sure, we had some recessions over the last 22 years, but in the 30 years before that, PARA had climbed up to full funding through multiple recessions as well. So I stand against bad decision-making and want to ensure that PARA is sustainable out into the future.
Thank you, Mr. Young. Same question, Mr. Size. Would you like it repeated?
Please.
Generally, what is your view on PARA? The treasurer is a member of the governing board of PARA. Will you attend all of the meetings? What will be your approach to PARA's unfunded liability?
Well, thank you very much. PARA is extremely important for at least 3 reasons. First of all, we have 600,000, almost 600,000 members across our state. They matter. Second, the taxpayers put a lot of money into it. That's important. Third, when businesses are looking at where they might locate, one of the things that they look at in their site survey is the state's unfunded liability in its pension system, because they view the unfunded liability as their future tax liability. So we should all care about this. I was deeply involved in the legislature in the important reforms that we did in 2018. Para was on the edge of a cliff, and with a bipartisan group, we actually put it back on a much better trajectory. I am very proud of that. I voted for those reforms. The current treasurer did not. There are several things that will be very important to keep Para going. I will, of course, be deeply involved in this. I have sat on a subcommittee that oversees it for the last 3 years. We need to make sure, first of all, that the state upholds its obligation to continually fund Para according to that 2018 legislation, and I have been a consistent public advocate for that. We also need to take very careful look at the actuarial assumptions we make about how long people are going to live. That's an important challenge for Para, and we also need to communicate very fairly and candidly with Para members about the status of Para. It is hugely important to this state, and I will be a big supporter of it.
Rebuttal.
You know, the bill in 2018, and I was actually finishing my term in the State House. I had been on the Joint Budget Committee for 4 years, digging deeply into the finances of our state of Colorado year after year after year. And the commitment of the state through Senate Bill 200 in 2018 to put money in directly to Para is important. I was an outspoken advocate, wrote an editorial encouraging the General Assembly to fulfill its obligation on the $225 million when the recession actually caused a pause in that payment. I mentioned the year 2000 when bad decisions were making, and I will tell you the reason I voted against that bill is that the actual details of the bill were not available to legislators. The financials were not available to legislators in the 11th hour when the vote was being taken on the last day of the 2018 session. And it's my commitment to always do the due diligence necessary of the Treasury to ensure that decisions are made that are appropriate, and that we don't have a repeat of the bad decision-making that we had in the year 2000 that caused this steep decline in the funding of Para.
Thank you, Mr. Young. Mr. Sias gets the first crack at the final question. There's a lot of money to be made on the Treasury's debt issuances. How will you make sure that Colorado has adequate expertise on these debt offerings and gets the best rates possible?
I believe in accessing really smart people to help you in these jobs, and that is a hugely important part of this. The Treasury Department has, of course, investment professionals and a CFO on the staff who I believe have done a very, very capable job in investing our dollars and doing it at low rates and hitting the benchmarks that we need to. The investments that we need to make are very, very carefully circumscribed statutorily. What we can actually invest in is very carefully circumscribed. And I will follow that very carefully, and I will make sure to keep all politics out of investment decisions and selection of investment managers.
Thank you, Mr. Sias. Same question, would you like it repeated?
Please.
There's a lot of money to be made on the Treasury's debt issuances. How will you make sure that Colorado has adequate expertise on these debt offerings and gets the best rates possible?
Thank you, and I asked to be repeated because I believe that this was about not investment, but about debt issuance. And Representative Sias may not be aware, but we have a very wide range of professionals that we tap in the financial services community. He's right, we have professionals in the office that manage the process, but we also have financial advisors. We have bond and disclosure counsel that actually do deep dives into these issuances. We produce an offering statement, often several hundred pages in length, so investors really know for sure that they can have confidence if they invest in the state. And so we work very intensely and very broadly. We have a pool of financial advisors and attorneys that we select from the pool. They're thoroughly vetted to make sure politics doesn't enter into it and that we're actually doing right by the taxpayers. I spend a lot of time when I am working on debt issuance in communications with our rating agencies. And our rating agencies, for every issuance, do a deep dive also and rate the state. They look at, interestingly, our para standards. They look at the constitutional restrictions that we have in the state for flexibility of budgeting, and they also now are asking about water and issues around climate change and how we are going to move our state forward in a way that actually not only can just survive but thrive. And so this work is very intense on debt issuance. I'm not sure the Representative Sias was dialed into the question. That's why I wanted to dig in.
Thank you, Mr. Young. Rebuttal?
Oh, I'm quite well dialed in. The key point here is to eliminate conflicts of interest in anyone that the state would be paying money to, and also eliminate any sort of political bias or political agenda. The point here is we have fiduciary duties. We have fiduciary duties to the para members, and we also have a duty to our taxpayers to invest and spend their money without conflict of interest and without politics.
Thank you, Mr. Sias. We will now move into the cross-examination portion of the debate. Each candidate will be given 4 minutes to ask questions of their opponent on matters pertinent to the race or office. Please be reminded that questions should be pertinent to the office you are running for and should not include any attacking speech or profane language. I reserve the right to redirect a candidate if their remarks are not pertinent to the elected office. Candidate Sias will begin the cross-examination.
Well, thank you very much. And I should say that Treasurer Young and I actually served together in the legislature and have done some bills together on people with intellectual and developmental disabilities and so forth. So we are not unknown to each other in this process. My first question is, in 2019, you were, while the sitting treasurer, a leading proponent, public proponent of Proposition CC, which would have eliminated Tabor refunds, not just in 2019, but forever, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And so the $750 that people have received or about to receive this year from the Treasury, if you had had your way, because the voters, of course, voted that down by about 7.2%, if you had had your way, they would not be getting the $750, correct?
That's your question?
That is my next question, yes. They would not be getting that, correct?
That's correct.
Thank you. Okay, and now you want, respectfully, you want the folks out here and all over the state to thank you and support you for them getting the $750 that A, they were going to get anyway because of the Tabor refund, and B, that you tried to prevent them from getting, correct?
So I want to comment on that at this point.
But it's a pretty simple question, right?
Well, it is, and it's a very interesting answer because I always follow the law, and I may have different opinions about the Constitution and the law, but when I am challenged to follow the law, I do. So Tabor requires a refund, and we, in fact, follow the law, we get the refund. I think what we've done innovatively is Republicans were willing to have you wait until April or March this next year in order to get your Tabor refund, but we actually moved that forward because we know people are hurting now.
Okay,
they have higher prices and they need the money in their pockets now.
Respectfully.
We also did it in a fair way. So we did it instead of based on income, we actually had a flat amount, and we moved that money out.
But respectfully,
Everybody's
respectfully,
$750.
you are asking people, and you've done this publicly, and you've done it in a written fashion, to essentially thank you and elect you because of sending them money that you actually tried to prevent them from getting.
So I mentioned earlier that I actually had a front row seat to the budget. for 4 years, something
I
that
have-
Representative
I have
Lang-Size
another-
did
I have
not
another
have. I
question.
had the opportunity to dig through
Mr.
there.
Young,
I have another question.
let
Okay.
him proceed.
Okay. We talked about the Secure Savings Program, which is this retirement IRA for folks generally on the lower end of the income spectrum. I support the idea behind it, but we also need to take a very close look at what the results have been in other states. Isn't it true that in the report that you all commissioned, that the results from states that have been doing this is that they have an opt-out rate of between 30 and 40%, and the average annual savings is $300 or less per individual? Isn't that what your own reports say?
So the report, which was issued in the year 2020, gave us some pretty interesting insights. And the insights were the fact that we had two different kinds of plans that we were considering. One was the auto IRA opt-out program, which Oregon, Illinois, and California have, and the voluntary program the state of Washington had. Oregon had 60,000 savers at the end of 3 years. Washington had 300. And those amounts that are saved are going up because more and more people are getting enrolled. I'm about savers and I'm about sustainability. The private sector wasn't touching these accounts, and the taxpayers would be on an $18 billion bill over the next 15 years for safety net services because we would be driving people into poverty. I don't want to drive people into poverty. I want to lift people up.
And
the
at
Secure Savings program
$300
does
a
that.
year, you're not going to solve that problem. I wish we could, but we're just not, and we need to stop talking about it as though it's a panacea.
Okay, and we're going to move on to cross-examination by candidate Young. You have 4 minutes to ask questions of Mr. Sias.
So let's continue on Colorado Secure Savings. This bill actually was run in the legislature twice when you were a state representative before we actually got it passed in the year 2020. And again, I always am interested in lifting people up, making sure that they have a pathway to sustainability, particularly in retirement. But you voted twice against this program. Why did you do that? And can the 1 million people that are anticipating having this better financial trajectory trust you to continue to fully implement this program when you voted against it?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll tell you why I voted against it when I was in the House Business Committee, and that is that the sponsors of the bill never did a sufficient job of convincing me and many other folks there that the program was actually going to be a significant benefit to the people that it was designed to help. For example, the fees that they were planning on charging to the employees themselves, and these are folks generally at the bottom of the income spectrum, the fees were many times higher than what you would pay with a private sector plan. It was also an opt-out. In other words, they were forcing you in unless you selected out. Any program that is an opt-out, you have to think a couple of times about it before you figure that it's actually going to work well. There were also, even though it was opt-out, incredibly high opt-out rates, which means that a lot of the people that were impacted would not be taking advantage of it. They were also going to take 5% of their salary. Well, as the reports point out, 5% of your salary for somebody who's at the bottom end of the income spectrum may not be something that they can afford. And one of the things that they mention in the report is the fact that folks would then go and use payday lending services and other means to generate cash flow, which were even more expensive. Finally, there are very, very high cash-out rates among people who have saved for a little while and then they change jobs. Well, that may be all well and good for short-term cash flow, but it doesn't do anything to help you for retirement savings. So there were a number of misgivings that I and others had about the program, and that's why we voted against it. Now, I do want to answer the other part of your question.
Okay.
I absolutely will run this and support this enthusiastically. Remember, I come out of the military. I am used to following orders, and if the legislature has assigned this to the Treasury Department, I will do it absolutely to the best of my ability, and I support the sentiment. I support the idea. I just am skeptical about the mechanism, as we often see government solutions to these problems often just don't work out that well.
When you voted no, you were concerned about opt-out rates, but when you voted no, you essentially ruled 1 million people out of an opportunity to go for savings. So we have 70% of the people that actually have a pathway. The other side of that is we know if they don't have this opportunity, they're going to be accessing safety net services like Medicaid as well as Medicare, housing supports. That's an $18 billion bill to the taxpayers over the next 15 years. Are you comfortable handing an $18 billion bill to the citizens of the state of Colorado?
Well, first of all, the bill wasn't going to work. If the sponsors had come back to us with a better plan, we tried to amend it, but the sponsors didn't want to do that. And the bottom line is, the bottom line is, I want to serve this same group of people, but just having an idea and a government program doesn't necessarily solve the problem.
Okay, let's move on to closing remarks. Each candidate now has 3 minutes to present closing remarks. Candidate Sias will go first.
Well, thank you very much. Appreciate you all being here. I would point to 2 words and 2 concepts. One is balance, and the other one is leadership. This state works best when we have a balance of our leadership, and we simply have not had that for the last 3 years. And we have seen it in the cost of living. You know, Colorado ranks first in the nation. If you go back to January 2021 and finish up in July of this year, we are first in the nation in the number of additional dollars that folks are paying for transportation, food, housing, and energy. And that just didn't happen by accident. It happened, in my opinion, because one party has taken the state very far left and imposed a lot of fees and costs that previously didn't exist. And I think it is very important that we restore some balance. Leadership, I have spent my whole life running towards the fire. And I did it in the legislature, and I worked across the aisle, and I'm proud of that. And I did it on Para, where I worked across the aisle, and I'm proud of that. And I will continue to lead. I will do it in this job, and I think our state can be better for it if we have some balance. I am very, very hopeful for the future of our state with some balance restored, and it would be a tremendous honor for me to serve you all.
Thank you, Mr. Sias. Candidate Young, you now have 3 minutes to give closing remarks. Thank
you. Jay, I want to again thank you for giving up your time for this today, and all of you as well. As I mentioned, it's been an honor to serve you as state treasurer. I've taken this job very seriously over the past almost 4 years, and I have leveraged the knowledge that I have acquired over the time I was in the State House and on the Joint Budget Committee to dig deeply into the financial issues that really impact us. We have a significant problem in state of Colorado when it comes to education. We have the lowest salaries in the country for competitive salaries for teachers. And as a result, our school systems are struggling trying to fill positions. We can talk about policy, we could talk about the constitutional restrictions that Tabor has provided, but I'm about outcomes. I want our state not just to survive, I want it to thrive. And the programs that I'm working on lift people up. I ask for your support for the next 4 years because these programs are going to produce outstanding outcomes that are going to lift up our entire state. We've got to address a variety of issues, as you well know, around water and infrastructure, affordable housing, our funding of our educational systems, and I have deep knowledge in each of these areas and want to work with all the legislature and all the communities across the state of Colorado that I want to be sure that we're not just surviving, that we're thriving. And I think that if we work together, we can. I have a track record of actually collaboration and working together. When I was on the Joint Budget Committee, there were 3 Republicans and 3 Democrats. I was one of the 3. And it would take 4 votes in order to pass anything on the budget. And for 4 years running, we got a balanced budget because we worked together. Over 99% of thousands of votes were 6-0 votes. And it's because we knew we had a job to do, and we, in fact, needed to get that budget done for the good of the people. So I have a proven track record of working together and making sure that we lift the state up, and I want to continue that opportunity as I continue to do the work in the Treasury on your behalf. I ask for your support. Thanks so much.
Please join me in thanking both of these gentlemen for a substantive and civil debate.
It was civil.
And thank you, gentlemen, for your willingness to serve the state of Colorado.